Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud through every kind of moment a game show stage can hold. Marriage proposals, breakdowns, reunions that made the camera operators walk off set to collect themselves. He had watched grown men weep over answers worth 0 points, and grandmothers dance after stealing rounds they had no business winning. But in all of those tapings, over 4,000 episodes across 2 decades of live television, he had never watched one contestant stare at another contestant the way the young woman at Podium 2 was staring at the man across the stage. She was not staring with anger. She was not staring with confusion. She was staring with the kind of recognition that takes 20 years to build, the kind that starts in childhood and accumulates quietly, like snow on a roof, until the weight of it changes the shape of everything underneath. She knew him. He did not know her. And what she was about to say, 6 words, spoken into a microphone in front of 200 strangers, would take a 68-year-old retired teacher to his knees and leave Steve Harvey standing at his podium with both hands flat on the surface, unable to form a single word for over a minute. It was a Wednesday taping in early September. The studio was running warm, the air conditioning had been fighting a losing battle since noon, and the crew had quietly placed 2 industrial fans behind the lighting rig where the audience could not see them. 3 games had already taped cleanly. The energy was solid but unhurried. A midweek pace. Steve was in good form. He had landed a 7-second stare directly into camera 2 after a contestant answered a horse to the question name something you bring to a potluck, and the clip would later circulate on social media for most of the following week. The 4th game of the day was the Osei family from Chattanooga, Tennessee, versus the Cruz family from Toledo, Ohio. On paper, it was a standard matchup. 5 members per side, no special segments, no surprises flagged by the production team. The Osei family came out first, warm, organized, matching shirts. The Cruz family followed, younger, louder, matching energy in a different key, hugs instead of handshakes, laughter before the introductions even started. Steve worked the line on both sides. Names, jobs, jokes. The audience was engaged. The floor manager counted down. Nobody on the production staff had cross-referenced the 2 families. There was no reason to. The casting process selected each family independently. Background checks covered legal issues, not personal histories. So nobody knew that the young woman standing at the far end of the Cruz podium, the quiet one, the one who had barely spoken during introductions, had spent the first 30 seconds on stage scanning the faces of the opposing family with the careful, searching intensity of someone who had traveled a very long way to find something she was not yet certain she had found. Raymond Osei was 68 years old and had been retired from teaching for 3 years. He had spent 31 years in the Chattanooga public school system, all of them at Eastdale Elementary, all of them in the 4th grade. He was the kind of teacher whose name former students remembered decades later, not because he was flashy or theatrical, but because he paid attention. He noticed things. Which child came to school in the same shirt 3 days running? Which child flinched when a door slammed? Which child ate lunch like it was the only meal they would get that day, quickly, silently, with their arm curled around the tray? He had a system. On the first day of every school year, he placed a brand new composition notebook on every desk, the marbled black and white kind, the ones that cost $1.40 at the drugstore. He told his students the same thing every September. This is your book. You can write anything in it. Anything you want to say that you don't know how to say out loud. I will never read it unless you ask me to. But if you ever leave it open on your desk, I will understand that as an invitation. In 31 years, hundreds of children had written in those notebooks. Most wrote stories. Some drew pictures. Some wrote nothing at all and used the pages to press leaves or tape photographs. And a small number, maybe a dozen across all those years, left their notebooks open on their desks, Raymond knew what that meant. It meant help. It meant something at home was wrong in a way the child did not have the words for. And when a notebook was left open, Raymond read it carefully, documented what he found, and followed the reporting protocols he had been trained to follow. He did not talk about it. He did not bring it up in the teacher's lounge. He simply did what the situation required and moved on to the next school year. Because the work was not about Raymond Osei, it was about the child sitting at the desk. Standing across the stage from him, in a navy blouse and silver earrings and the steady posture of someone who had spent a long time learning how to stand up straight, was Valentina Cruz. She was 28. A pediatric nurse at a hospital in Toledo. She had dark hair pulled back in a low knot and a face that carried a particular kind of composure. The composure of someone who had learned early that falling apart was not an option and had built an entire adult life on the foundation of that lesson. In her bag, tucked inside a zippered pocket beside her wallet and her hospital ID badge, was a composition notebook. Marbled, black and white, 20 years old. The cover was battered and the spine was cracked and the pages had yellowed to the color of old piano keys. On the inside front cover, in a teacher's neat block handwriting, were 7 words. She had read them 10,000 times. She knew them the way she knew her own pulse, without effort, without thought. The way you know something that has become part of the architecture of who you are. Raymond Osei did not recognize her. She had been 8 years old the last time he saw her, and she had not been using the name Cruz. She had been a different child in a different life. And the woman standing at the Cruz family podium bore almost no resemblance to the girl who had once sat at the third desk in the second row of his 4th grade classroom and left her notebook open 4 times in one semester. But she recognized him instantly. She had been looking for him for 6 years. Valentina had been 8 years old when she entered Raymond Osei's 4th grade class at Eastdale Elementary. She was small for her age, quiet in a way that teachers sometimes mistook for shyness, but was actually something else entirely, a practiced stillness, the kind a child develops when being noticed at home means being in the way. Her biological mother was in and out of treatment. Her biological father had left when she was 3. She lived with her mother's boyfriend, a man whose name she no longer spoke aloud, in a 2-bedroom apartment where the second bedroom had a lock on the outside of the door. She came to school clean. She came to school on time. She turned in every assignment and sat with her hands folded and answered when called upon. She had learned, by the age of 8, how to make herself look like a child who was fine. Most teachers believed it. Raymond did not. He noticed that she wore long sleeves in September. He noticed that she did not eat the school lunch. She stared at it, rearranged the food with her fork, and carried the full tray to the trash without taking a bite. As if eating were something she had been told not to do. He noticed that she startled at sounds that did not startle other children. The bang of a textbook dropped on the floor, a raised voice in the hallway. He did not confront her. He did not pull her aside and ask what was happening at home. He had been trained well enough to know that a direct question from an authority figure could push a child deeper into silence rather than draw them out. Instead, on the second week of school, he placed a composition notebook on her desk, the same as every other student, and said the same words he said every year. "This is your book. If you ever want to tell me something you can't say out loud, just leave it open on your desk." Valentina did not open the notebook for 2 months. And then, on a Monday morning in November, Raymond walked into his classroom and found it sitting on her desk. Open, face up. A single sentence written on the first page in pencil, pressed so hard the letters dented the paper beneath. The sentence read, "I am not allowed to eat dinner when I am bad, and I am always bad." Raymond read the sentence 3 times. He closed the notebook gently. He placed it in his desk drawer. He taught his class that morning with the same calm, steady voice he used every day, and Valentina watched him from the third desk in the second row with eyes that were searching for any sign that he had seen what she wrote. He gave her none, not because he did not care, but because the hallway had ears and the classroom had 23 other children. And the next steps needed to happen in a specific order or the system would fail her. At lunch, he walked to the principal's office and filed a report. By 2 o'clock, a caseworker from the Department of Children's Services had been assigned. By the following Friday, Valentina had been removed from the apartment. She did not come to school the next Monday. Or the Monday after that. The seat at the third desk in the second row sat empty, and Raymond was told only that the child had been placed and was safe. That was all the system would share with a classroom teacher. The file was closed on his end. The notebook stayed in his desk drawer. He kept it for 2 years. Every June, when he cleaned out his classroom for summer, he would find it in the back of the drawer, run his thumb across the cover, and put it back. He did not know where Valentina had gone. He did not know if the placement had held. He did not know if she was in another school, another city, another state. After 2 years, he brought the notebook home. He put it in a box in his closet with a small collection of things he had kept across his career: drawings from students, a hand-painted mug, a letter from a parent. He did not look at it again. But he thought about her. He thought about her on the first day of every school year, when he placed a new set of composition notebooks on 24 desks. He thought about her when he watched a quiet child eat lunch alone. He thought about her when the news carried stories about children who had not been noticed in time. He never knew what happened to her. What happened was this. Valentina was placed with a foster family in Knoxville, Miguel and Rosa Cruz, both public school teachers themselves, both trained foster parents, both the kind of people who understood that a child who does not eat dinner is not a child who is not hungry. She was adopted 14 months later. She took their name. She grew up in a house with a yard and a dog named Captain and a kitchen table where nobody was punished for being present. She graduated from high school with honors. She enrolled in nursing school. She became a pediatric nurse because she wanted to be the person in the room who noticed the things that other people missed, the child who flinched, the child who did not eat, the child whose silence was not shyness but survival. She chose that career because of a man who had placed a composition notebook on her desk and said, "If you ever want to tell me something you can't say out loud, just leave it open." She had tried to find him for 6 years. Social media searches, alumni directories, a letter sent to Eastdale Elementary that came back marked return to sender because Raymond had retired and the forwarding address was out of date. And then, in July, her cousin's wife submitted a Family Feud application. And in August, Valentina saw the list of opposing families for their taping date, a list that included a family named Osei from Chattanooga, Tennessee, led by a 68-year-old retired elementary school teacher. She knew before she read the first name. The game went 3 rounds. The Oseis were solid. Raymond himself was surprisingly good at the buzzer, his reflexes sharper than his family expected, and his daughter Abina was a natural who seemed to anticipate the board before Steve finished reading the questions. But Valentina could barely play. She buzzed in late. She gave answers she immediately second-guessed. Her cousin nudged her twice and whispered, "Val, focus," but her eyes kept drifting to the other podium. To Raymond, to a man who was standing 15 feet away from her, laughing at Steve's jokes, adjusting his glasses, living an ordinary afternoon in complete ignorance of who she was. He did not recognize her. She knew he would not. She had been a different person, a different name, a different body, a different life. The 8-year-old girl who left a notebook open on a desk in Chattanooga bore no visible connection to the 28-year-old woman in the navy blouse standing across a game show stage in a studio far from Tennessee. The Oseis won the main game. They qualified for fast money. The audience applauded. Steve congratulated both families. The Cruz family began stepping away from their podium, and the Osiris moved forward to set up the bonus round. The taping was about to continue. The moment was about to pass. Valentina gripped the strap of her bag, the bag with the notebook inside it, and made a decision she had rehearsed in her head 1,000 times, but had never been certain she could execute. "Steve," she said. Her voice was clear. Not loud, but clear enough to cut through the transition noise. The floor manager looked up. A camera operator pivoted. Steve, who was halfway to the Fast Money podium, turned around. "Steve, can I say something?" Before the next round, Steve looked at the producer. The producer hesitated. They were on a schedule. Fast Money was set up. The Osiris were in position. But Steve looked at Valentina's face, at the controlled intensity behind her eyes, at the way her hand was shaking against the strap of her bag, and he nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Valentina stepped out from behind the Cruz podium. She walked to the center of the stage, and she turned to face Raymond Osei. Raymond looked at her politely. "The way you look at a stranger who has something to say that probably has nothing to do with you." "Mr. Osei," she said. "My name is Valentina Cruz. But that is not the name you knew me by." Raymond's expression shifted. Not recognition. Not yet. Something closer to attention, the instinct of a man who had spent 3 decades listening to children and had never fully turned that skill off. "You were my 4th grade teacher," she said, "at Eastdale Elementary, 20 years ago." Raymond stared at her. His mouth opened slightly. His hand came up to adjust his glasses, a reflex, not a decision, and behind the lenses his eyes were moving. Scanning her face the way a man scans a photograph he almost recognizes, searching for the version of a person he last saw when they were 3 feet shorter and carried a different last name. "I sat in the 3rd desk in the 2nd row," Valentina said. "And you gave me a composition notebook on the 2nd week of school. You gave one to every student. But mine was different. You wrote something inside the cover." She reached into her bag, she unzipped the pocket, and she pulled out a notebook, marbled, black and white, battered, cracked at the spine, the pages browned and soft with age. Raymond's hand dropped from his glasses. His lips pressed together. Valentina opened the notebook to the inside front cover and held it up so Raymond could see. 7 words, written in neat block handwriting. His handwriting. The handwriting of a 37-year-old teacher who had placed this notebook on a small desk 2 decades ago and had no way of knowing what it would become. The words read, "Your voice matters. Use it when ready." Raymond's knees gave out. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies. He simply went down, one knee first, then the other, as if the floor had risen gently to meet him because his legs had decided, without consulting the rest of him, that standing was no longer possible. His daughter Abina rushed forward. His son-in-law grabbed his arm. But Raymond was not falling. He was kneeling. He was looking at the notebook in Valentina's hands, and his face was doing something that 200 people would later struggle to describe, a kind of recognition that was not just memory but reckoning. The full weight of a choice made 20 years ago landing in his body all at once. "Valentina," he whispered. And then, softer, the old name. The name on the attendance sheet. The name he had written on the report he filed on a November afternoon. Miha. Valentina broke. She had held it together for the introductions, the game, the walk to center stage, the speech. She had controlled her voice and her hands and her breathing with the discipline of a woman who had built an entire life on the ability to stay composed when everything inside her was shaking. But hearing that name, her old name, the name she had not heard spoken aloud since she was 8 years old, from the voice of the man who had been the first person to see her, undid all of it. She dropped to her knees in front of him and they held each other on the stage floor, and neither of them could speak, and neither of them needed to. Steve Harvey stood at his podium. He did not move. He did not speak. His hands were flat on the surface, and his jaw was tight, and his eyes were full, and he did not attempt to narrate what was happening because some moments are too complete to be improved by a voice. 1 minute passed, then another. The longest unscripted silence in the history of the show. Nobody broke it. Nobody tried. When they finally separated, Raymond held Valentina at arm's length and studied her face the way he had studied the faces of every child who had ever sat in his classroom, carefully, completely, with the full attention of a man who understood that seeing someone is not a passive act. "I looked for you," he said. His voice was rough and unsteady. "I asked the school. I asked the district. They told me you were placed and safe, and that was all they could share." "I know," Valentina said. "I kept your notebook for 2 years. I kept it in my desk. I didn't know what else to do with it." Valentina held up the composition notebook. "Rosa, my mom, my adopted mom, she contacted the school when I was 10. She asked if any of my teachers had kept anything. Your principal found it in your classroom closet. She mailed it to us." Raymond pressed both hands against his face. "I read it," he said through his fingers, "before I put it in the drawer. I read what you wrote. That sentence, I know. It was the worst sentence I ever read in 31 years of teaching." Steve Harvey stepped forward then. Slowly, the way a man steps into a room where something sacred is happening and he is not sure he has earned the right to be present. "Valentina," Steve said. His voice was barely above a whisper and it carried through the silent studio like a bell. "Can you tell everyone here what happened after Mr. Osei read your notebook?" Valentina stood. She wiped her face with both hands. She looked at Steve, then at the audience, then back at Raymond, who was still on his knees. "He saved my life," she said. "He read one sentence in a composition notebook, and he did not look away. He did not decide it was someone else's problem. He did not wait until he had more evidence. He made a phone call that afternoon, and because of that phone call, I was placed with the 2 best people I have ever known, and I grew up safe, and I went to school, and I became a nurse." She looked down at Raymond. "I became a pediatric nurse because of you. Because I wanted to be the person in the room who notices what everyone else misses. That is what you taught me. Not from a textbook. From a notebook." Steve turned to the audience. The tears on his face were visible under the stage lights, and he made no effort to hide them. 31 years, Steve said. This man taught 4th grade for 31 years. He placed a notebook on every desk every September and told those kids the same thing. Write what you can't say. And he never knew, not once, not until this moment, what happened to the girl who took him up on it. He looked at Raymond. "Mr. Osei, you need to hear this from somebody other than your family. What you did was not part of your job description. Filing that report was required. But giving a child a way to ask for help she did not know how to ask for, that was a choice. And that choice is standing in front of you right now, 20 years later. Wearing scrubs at a children's hospital because you showed her what it looks like when somebody pays attention." Raymond stood slowly, with Abina's help. He straightened his glasses. He looked at Valentina. "I wrote those 7 words in every notebook," he said quietly. "Every student. Every year. But I think I wrote them for you." The fast money round was played 20 minutes late. The Osei won, Abina and Raymond together, 214 combined points, $15,000. Raymond donated a third of the winnings to the Eastdale Elementary Pita before the check had been printed. The episode aired in October. The clip of Valentina holding up the notebook, 7 words in a teacher's handwriting, 20 years of distance collapsed into a single moment, was viewed over 14 million times in its first 10 days. It was shared by teachers, nurses, social workers, foster parents, and a startling number of adults who had once been quiet children sitting at desks in classrooms where no one asked them to leave a notebook open. Valentina and Raymond stayed in contact. She drove to Chattanooga for Thanksgiving that year and sat at his family's table. Abina said later that her father talked more that evening than he had in the 3 years since retirement. Not about the show, not about the clip, but about teaching. About what it meant to spend 31 years in the same building doing the same work and never knowing which moments mattered and which ones passed through a child's life without leaving a mark. "Now I know," he told his daughter that night. "At least one of them mattered." Valentina still carries the notebook. Not every day, she is not Josephine Bellamy with a letter in her pocket, but it sits in the top drawer of her nightstand, beside her hospital badge and a photograph of Miguel and Rosa on their 20th anniversary. She opens it sometimes. She reads the first page, that sentence, pressed so hard into the paper the pencil nearly tore through, and then she turns to the inside cover and reads the 7 words Raymond Osei wrote there 20 years ago. "Your voice matters. Use it when ready." She used it on a Wednesday afternoon in September on a game show stage. In front of 200 strangers who came to watch families win money, and instead watched a woman find the man who had changed the entire direction of her life with a $40 notebook and the willingness to read what a child could not say. If this story reminded you of a teacher, a coach, a neighbor, a stranger, someone who noticed you when nobody else did, stay here. This channel has more of these moments, and the person who noticed you would want you to hear them,